record on this computer. And we are recording. So the idea behind this really came from conversation with a couple of people that I know, people that were referred to me. And I've helped a few people become adjuncts before. And honestly, it's not an easy process. I fell into it completely by chance. I don't think you know this, Gav, but basically 10 years ago or so, I was a consultant. I was coming off of work as a on-premise manager for Evian Water. And for about a year, I was consulting. I was working with different restaurants and brands and just helping them do what they need to do. And I had a lot of time on my hands. So I was talking with a friend of mine, David Gachigo from St. John's, who works in Staten Island campus. And he said, you know, you like to teach. You should talk to the hospitality and tourism area. You could do supply chain or something based on my Evian experience. I'm like, okay, sure. So I gave him a call and spoke with a gentleman, Dr. Glenn Gerstner now, who's actually the interim dean at St. John's in CPS. And we chatted first. He's like, I got nothing open for you now, but let's meet up in 2 weeks. The reason why I'm also telling this story is because the hustle part of it. And I said, okay, great. So I went in, we met, and within 10 minutes, he said, I know you'd be a good professor. He's like, just talking to you for 10 minutes, you'll be a good professor. And he basically said, if anything opened up, he would let me know, but it probably wouldn't be until the spring. I said, fine, great. So I just figured I'd go back to my consulting. And I think within 24 hours, 48 hours, I got a call from them. A professor had a death in the family, had to leave the country. And they asked me if I could jump right in, and I did. So a couple days later, I was teaching. I had done some teaching when I was in student affairs a decade before, teaching leadership and management, but I hadn't, and I taught Discover New York at St. John's as on the side of being an administrator. But this is my first time teaching a different kind of a subject based on my experience with Evian and working as a consultant. So that's how I got my foot in the door, was a little bit of a warm introduction, talking to somebody, and one class turned into a couple classes turned into another opportunity at LaGuardia. Then I ended up at City Tech, then Monroe, then European School of Economics, eventually taught at Kingsborough as well. I don't think I'm missing anybody. And eventually 4+ years ago, I applied to St. Joe's, and St. Joe's hired me on full-time, and I became a full-time professor and the chair of the program in Brooklyn. So that's kind of the trajectory that you can take. And, so the idea here is just to give the path that one can take to become an adjunct, and definitely stop me at any time, but I'm going to go through a few things that I think are important. So first of all, what are the requirements for being an adjunct? Generally, most people would say, oh, you need a master's degree in order to be an adjunct professor. That is not entirely accurate, because there are plenty of teaching positions where you can be, you could have no degree, but you could have experience. And so this is really, I think, relevant for a lot of people in industry and a lot of people that you work with, Gav. You talk about those 600 partners that you've generated over time. A lot of them are partners. They're specialists within their industry. They're very knowledgeable of their industry. And, in higher education, it's good to have a good mix. You want the academics, but you also want the practitioners. The academics can talk about their field of experience and their research. The practitioners can come in and say, this is what I did today, and this is what I do. That's why adjuncts are so important, is they really infuse real life, real world examples, which is super important. So you don't need a master's, but I can tell you that it's so much easier once you have that master's. I got mine right out of undergrad. So I went right from undergrad to a master's program at Clemson. And at that point, I was basically eligible to teach in pretty much any institution. The only exception is you generally need a doctorate to teach in some roles, depending on the accreditation or the expectations of that institution. How's that work for you, Gav? Make sense?
Yeah, sounds good. So let me ask you, to be an adjunct, is there typically a minimum number of classes that you are supposed to teach? So like if you wanted to be an adjunct and you just wanted to just teach one course for the semester, is that possible? Or do colleges typically require you to do at least 2 or 3?
It's actually the flip. It's so they'll generally give you one to start off once and I'm going to talk about how to qualify as an adjunct. But once they like you, they're going to ask you to teach 2 to 3 per semester if your schedule can accommodate it. You know, most adjuncts are working full-time or part-time, and then they adjunct on the side. So they'll pick up one course and, you know, depending on what their schedule allows. I started out with one course. It grew into multiple courses. One semester, I was teaching 9 courses, which is insanity. Please don't ever do that. But that was a very unique circumstance, and it just worked because of who I was working with. But like a city tech, if they'd rather work with fewer instructors than more instructors. So if they like your style of teaching and you have the knowledge to be able to do it, they want you to teach 3, but that's not automatic. You know, you start with 1.
Okay.
So I hope that makes sense.
Yep.
So if you have your master's, great. If you have a bachelor's degree, that'll get you in the door at a lot of schools, not all schools. And then sometimes you don't need any degree if you follow a specific path. Let me back up to explain kind of the traditional academic path. And that's somebody gets their bachelor's, maybe they go out and get a little bit of industry experience. They go back for their master's. Maybe they go back out, get a little bit more industry experience, or do it on the side. And then they go the path of getting a doctorate, which can take either generally, I'd say 5 to 8 years. And that's just my own experience. It took me 15, but that's not the norm. I started one program, ran out of time, and had to start up again and finish mine. I finished mine in 2018. Once you have a doctorate, that qualifies you to teach at any level. And it's a good investment if that's what you want to do. If you want to be a full-time professor or go the administrative route, having the doctorate is a big plus. No school will deny you for that reason. They might deny you because they don't think you're a good teacher, or they might deny you because you don't have the right experience to teach. But outside of that, the way that I look at the adjunct pipeline is, and this is a good model, I think, for anybody who's in the business of hiring adjuncts, is you find people in industry that are knowledgeable. And we'll use an example. I was on a call just earlier. My friend Allison Park, who's the founder of Bren Whiskey, who was on our advisory board at St. Joe's. You bring her in as a guest speaker. Okay, great. She does a good job. She engages the students. You're like, okay, that's good. Get her on the advisory board. You get her more involved in the curriculum. And then if there is that moment that works, you say, okay, Allison, what would you think about becoming an adjunct? We have this course on beverage management. You know everything about beverages. Would that be something that you're interested in? Now, given the person, they may not be interested in that. But I know a lot of people in industry that would love that, from hospitality and tourism. And so at that point, you would work through the process of making sure that they have the credentials to teach at a St. Joe's. Usually at that level, probably look for a master's degree. You have a question, Gav?
Yes. Do you have to present an entire curriculum in advance, or is it something that you can kind of, I don't like to use this phrase, but can you basically make it up as you go along? Can you just stay a couple lessons ahead of your students as you're trying to put your your lessons together? Because that's how I did it as a teacher, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
As a first-year teacher, I didn't have my curriculum lined out, but I would just have to, you know, see a couple lesson plans ahead of my kids.
Well, I would say that there are plenty of administrators out there that will allow that to happen.
Yeah.
I won't allow that to happen because of my approach to pedagogy. But, you know, I think it's important to equip, well, okay, let me flip it back to the adjunct's perspective. You don't have to demonstrate that you have a curriculum in mind, because what's going to happen is that they're going to hand you a syllabus and they're going to say, can you teach this? And you're going to say, yes. And then you take that syllabus and then you work out your prep, which is, you know, essentially your script for each course. And there's a couple different ways to do that. But they're going to talk to you. They should talk to you about, okay, how are you going to handle your first class? You know, what do you think? Because a lot of these people that come out of industry, they've never taught a course. And unfortunately, one of the weirdest things about higher education is that we don't teach people how to teach. It's higher education, but we don't teach people how to teach, with the exception of the education area.
Right.
K through 12, PK through 12, those teachers get more training to teach than college and university instructors.
Yeah.
Which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
No, but you would just be handed a syllabus. Hey, Gav, can you teach us? Yeah, great. Here's a syllabus. You know, once that happens, you know, unfortunately, it's kind of, you're just thrown into the deep end. Figure it out.
Is it the professor that selects the reading materials for the course, or is it the school that determines that, or is it a mixture of both?
It's a mixture. It depends on the type of institution. Some schools will say, here's the syllabus, follow it. You know, follow week by week. Here's the textbook. Here's what you should be covering in each module each week. And let me know if you have any questions. You know, that's one approach. You know, St. John's, because I've been teaching for this one chair for 10 years, she basically says, it's your course. Here's the course outline, but make it your own. So I don't really deviate from the learning objectives of the course, but I can pick the textbook. I can structure it in terms of the grading scale and the learning activities. I can figure all that out for myself. And I'll give you a very specific example. The syllabus that they gave me was basically the grading structure was 3 big tests, you know, 25% of the final grade for each test kind of thing, and then some homework and then some participation. Like, that was the grading structure, which I'm not a big believer in gigantic tests in terms of, you know, assessing what the student knows. So I broke it down, and then I added group project, final project, discussions, assignments, and so that it's more comprehensive. But that's because I understand pedagogy and I've been teaching for a while. A lot of faculty, especially adjuncts, don't get that support. They don't get that guidance. And there's some schools where they get a ton of support and a ton of guidance, and there's somebody that sits with them and says, okay, let's talk about how you're going to manage your course. How are you going to manage the personalities in the class? But that's not always there. And what I've written down is that there's really a spectrum. You know, on one end of the spectrum, you get very little support. They throw you a syllabus and they say, good luck. On the other side of the spectrum, they have a very rich Center for Teaching and Learning, and there's somebody that sits down with you and explains to you the lingo, and this is what a learning objective is, and this is how you create a learning activity that gets the students there, and yada, yada, yada. So it depends on where you go. And I can, you know, in confidence, if I wasn't recording this, I would tell you what that's like for different schools, because I've taught at 7 schools in New York City.
Yeah, at the high school level, the principals, the assistant principals, they make a big deal about the various type of methods you use to teach, whether, you know, you have to mix it up. You have to do lecture and group work and student-centered instruction where you have the students present and stuff like that. At the college level, do you find that colleges really make a big deal about how you deliver instruction, or is it just totally up to the professor?
Very often it's up to the professor. There's a lot of creative license, especially at a research one institution, a bigger institution. They hire you for your credentials, and then they trust that you will have the knowledge and the ability to do all of those things. But I can tell you there's a lot of really terrible instructors at those schools, and at every school. You know, there's just not a lot of attention, and they will just lecture the entire course, and they will teach to the test, and they do all the things that we know from research don't work, but they keep doing it because there is that creative freedom. They're hiring very often the faculty member because they come in with all these accolades and this research they've done, and they have the doctorate and blah, blah, blah. And then they're a terrible teacher, but they're like, it's okay.
Yeah.
So
how exactly are adjunct professors evaluated, if they're doing a good job or not?
that's a great question. And that wasn't even on my list. Fantastic. Yeah. So let's say that you pass muster, you get in, they hire you to teach that one class, okay? They should do an observation for you each semester that you teach. And so City Tech, for instance, is really, really good about it. When I taught there, each semester I could count on one of the professors coming in and sitting in on one of my courses. And what you do is you send them, make sure that they have your syllabus, you send them a lesson plan, what you're going to be covering in that particular course, what your learning objectives are going to be for that course, for that class. So they'll sit through, if it's a 3-hour class, they might sit through the first half or the second half, and you figure that out with them. But they know you've already told them what you're going to be doing in that particular class on that particular day, and then they follow up after they've sat through your class and give you an evaluation. And that evaluation goes into your file. And so I have years worth of them from City Tech. I have some from Monroe. I have some from St. Joe's. And that's how you know. And you sit down with the professor afterwards. You say, what do you think? And what did you learn? And they say, well, I like the way you did this. I like the way you interacted with the students. I like the way that you created a class activity, that sort of thing.
So how does that look when it comes to distance teaching, though? How exactly is that evaluated?
Well, the tricky part there is most instructors out there don't know online pedagogy. So let me put that out there. So that means that there's very few people that can properly evaluate online pedagogy. There are probably, actually, this is what I've been saying for a little while now. COVID hitting in March, in some ways, took online education one step forward. But the resulting teaching that was allowed took us 2 steps back or more, because it became acceptable to do a lot of very bad things online. Because you can't just teach the same way that you teach face-to-face in an online setting. It doesn't work. There's an entire pedagogy around online learning. So if you get one of these instructors who's evaluating another instructor, but they themselves don't know good online pedagogy, and they're like, you're doing a great job, and all they're doing is lecturing through video, that's not good feedback. You need somebody, and I know a decent amount of people that can do this well because they know online pedagogy, and they can say, I like how you did this, I like how you did this, but this is where you can improve, and this is where you can improve. And so it's a little bit of a vicious cycle. So I think it's going to be a couple years before we get back to where we need to be, and then we can forge ahead. There's just too many people out there that think they call themselves an online instructor, and they're not. They're just somebody who taught the same way they taught face-to-face through a camera.
Yeah. So if for somebody who is thinking about being an adjunct professor, they have no prior experience within that role, what would you say is a typical salary range for that position? And does it make a difference if it's private or public institution?
It's actually, there's differences more state by state. and type of institution. There's a range. I can tell you from my own experience in New York City, which is very different than other places. But it's about, on the low end, it's about $2,000 per class over 15 weeks. And on the high end, $3,500. But then you go a couple states over and you get $6,000 per course, and other states $10,000 per course. It's really kind of all over the map. I think New York City, it might be a reflection of how much talent is in the city. So they don't have to work as hard to hire somebody as an adjunct. And the assumption is that this is not their primary income. This is just a side little bonus that they're getting, or a little bit extra side hustle cash that they're getting for teaching this course. But that's also a problem, because that means that if somebody is a full-time adjunct like I was for a few years, that means that I'm depending on a bunch of courses in order to survive. And it's not healthy really to teach more than 6 courses per semester. I think 6 is manageable if you're a full-time adjunct.
Yeah.
You know, that's 3 times 6, that's 18 hours a week of instruction. And all the rest of that time, that's another 150 hours. You know, you have to sleep somewhere in there, but you have another 150 hours where you can do preps, you can do research, you can do grading, of course. But it's all about a balance. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was going to ask you, I've noticed in some classes, there are some professors, they pass out this evaluation form to the students, where the students can get to grade their professor in a sense. Do those hold any weight, or is that just, I mean, do the leadership in any colleges, do they actually take that feedback seriously at all?
Yeah, I think they look at it, and it depends on they look at the averages, they look at the trends in terms of how the instructor is doing. You know, they're not, the decision makers aren't in the classroom. So they're basing their decisions on whether or not to rehire that person based on student evaluations and the evaluation that was done by another professor who went into the classroom. But I've seen plenty of instructors that get pretty bad evaluations from their students. Okay, let me retract that. I've seen in a few occasions where instructors with very bad evaluations from their students get rehired as adjuncts. Plenty of professors that are tenured getting bad evaluations that just keep getting to do what they do. And so that's one of the unfortunate parts, is they, you know, once they get to that tenure part, some faculty just put on autopilot and do all the bad things. And the students can complain all they want, but it takes a lot to unseat a faculty member with tenure. So, but yeah, that feedback is important. And in a good system, the chair will say, okay, these are the evaluations that you received. This is the evaluation you got from your colleague. Let's talk about it, and let's talk about a plan for improvement. You know, you're spending too much time just lecture, talking at the students. Let's talk about doing some group activities. Let's talk about doing some different things that can improve the way that you instruct. Hi, Rich. Are you here for the adjunct session? It's possible that one of my students from my 5 o'clock class is going to come into the room, so I'm not sure if Rich is one of those. Rich? Oh, Rich is connecting to audio. Just give it a moment.
Yeah, some of our kids, they name themselves connecting to audio so that they don't have to talk.
That's hilarious. So yeah, it's I think in a good system, a good department, they provide feedback to the adjuncts and they help develop them. Because the idea is, ideally, an adjunct goes through the motions, they learn how to be a better instructor, and then they can keep climbing that ladder and become a full-time instructor. Being full-time faculty is an amazing situation. I know you work very, very hard, Gav, because that's your role. And there are a lot of faculty that work very, very hard, and they spend a lot of time doing things. But you can be a pretty good instructor and be a full-time faculty member and basically only work 20, 25 hours a week. That's pretty common, which is not a bad thing. That's why I see it as one of the best jobs in the world, and which is why some people think I'm nuts to want to go back into administration. But it's what it is. So let me continue on. I'll let Rich continue to connect to audio. But the faculty lifestyle is nice. The one of the benefits of being an adjunct is that you can accept the schedule that you want. You can negotiate that schedule sometimes with the chair of that department, but very often you get what you can. I mean, it's a hustle. And so when I was adjuncting full time, I would be constantly negotiating with the chairs, and I'm talking to them. I'm like, do you have a class for me? Do you have a class for me? What am I looking at? And then you're waiting to see if there's going to be enough enrollment in that course to see whether or not you'd be able to even teach that semester. And that can fluctuate in any direction. I started out with St. John's this semester. I was supposed to be teaching 3 courses. Okay, there's a couple different people. I think these might be some of my students, which is fine. But I started out with 3 courses, but due to low enrollment, I lost 2 of them. And so I ended up with the 1 course that I'm teaching at 5 o'clock today. But that's just the way that adjuncting works. And so you cobble together courses at different institutions. And with experience at one school, it gives you an opportunity to work in another school. Sometimes you'll teach the same kind of classes. Sometimes you'll teach completely different ones. But it is very much a hustle, and you really need to just kind of work through it. What I will say is that relationships are everything. How you give back to that institution. Sometimes they want you to just come in and teach, and sometimes they'll invite you to do other things, maybe to participate in some professional development, sometimes to sit on committees. But very often you're being hired to just teach the course. Make sure that you follow deadlines, you turn in grades when you need to. I wasn't always that great at that. And yeah, it's a fun. So let me share before we close out. I have to wrap at 4 o'clock. But let me cover a couple of things, and then you can ask me some last questions, and then we'll wrap for the day. Lingo is important. And so one of the things that I'll get into the next time I do this Adjunct Academy is talking about ways that you can improve your profile. So we'll do that next time. But some of the lingo is pretty fun. And I didn't know this. When I went into my interview for St. Joe's, the interim or the executive dean at the time said, "Oh, and yeah, and it'll be a 3-3." I said, "Oh, great, awesome." I had no idea what a 3-3 was. A 3-3 is you teach 3 courses in the fall, 3 courses in the spring. So there's these little lingo things that happen. The idea of a prep. Maybe from a PK through 12, that's something familiar, but it wasn't familiar to me until just in the last couple of years, because you prepare for your course, but I didn't think of how many preps. So a lot of academics manage their schedule and manage their time based on how many preps they have to do. If they're teaching the same course but 2 different sections, it may not be 2 preps. They might just consider it 1 prep. So that's important. And there's just the idea, and I've mentioned it before, the idea of learning objectives, content, assessments or the quizzes or the tests that the students have to take. Those are the pieces that we don't emphasize enough, because there's a there's a blueprint to teaching a course, and most are just thrown in. Here's a syllabus, teach the course. And that just pushes teachers, instructors to tell a lot of stories. And storytelling is super important, but there's a methodology that really works a lot better based on what we know of teaching pedagogy. So I'm going to stop there. We'll get into it a little bit more next session, but do you have any last questions before we wrap, Gav?
Nope, I'm good. This was very informative.
Oh, good. I'm glad. It's great to talk to you. I'm serious when I say, you know, anything that I can do to help. Just because I might be in a different role doesn't mean that I'm still not connected. And I am going to create some virtual things that absolutely will be hopefully helpful for the students in the schools that you work with. And please give my best to the team, Corinne, et cetera. And I miss you guys.
All right, sounds good, man. All right, we'll be in touch.
All right, Gav, take care.